Hey everyone, hope you're well. We're gonna kick this off, and it's a pleasure to be here on the call. Before we do get started, in case there are new people on the call, I just want to let you know about CTO Craft and give you a bit more detail about them. So, with CTO Craft, specifically, it's a mentoring and coaching community for tech leaders around the world to focus and support technologists. A community like this has been growing so much. There's about 5,000 CTO Craft members, and it provides coaching, mentoring, provides a space where creators and CTO leaders can communicate with one another through Slack. And it does all sorts of events on technical things, when it does more stuff on the softer side of things, including some of the topics we're going to talk about today. I just want to also say a huge thanks to AWS as well for being a headline partner that gives us the opportunity to do these sort of talks. Okay, so we're going to do an intro. First, I'm going to go first as the moderator. My name is Michael Olatokun, and I'm the founder of SkillStruct. To give you a personal intro, I'm a software engineer. I have a bachelor's in computer science, graduated in about, maybe 6, 7 years ago. And, since I've graduated, I've worked in all sorts of sector, started off in the government, then I went into the finance sector for a while, to where I'm at now, which is the consulting sector. And in my free time, I like to do stuff like learn languages. So I'm learning Spanish at the moment. And I have a big passion when it comes to technology and helping young people when it comes to technology, which led me into SkillStruct, which is a early tech consultancy, which actually fits the topic of discussion today because we specialize in helping young people get into the tech sector, specifically those from underrepresented groups. We also have a virtual network called the SkillStruct University Network, which provides a platform for all young people to learn technology, and we support them getting into the tech sector. But that's enough about me. I'm now going to hand it over to Ez to give you his introduction.
Hi there, great to be with you today. Fantastic, and thank you for everyone to listen to us as we speak about some of the interesting topics we're going to be covering today. So myself, I'm Ezechi Britton, or Ez, as most people know me. I'm one of the founding members, principal, and CTO in residence for Untappd Capital, and I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Untappd, Digital Skills Accelerator. So Code Untappd is an organization that identifies, upskills, and places diverse technology talent. And we do that through our community of pipeline referral organizations we work with. So we have an aggregated community of around 12,000 people, comprising organizations such as Coding Black Females, YSYS, and many other fantastic companies that we're working with or speaking to. We take that talent, we place them, and we get them into organizations such as Finality, TradeStream. We're in talks with organizations such as NatWest at the moment, AXA Insurance, and a lot of tier one companies that have a need to either transform digitally or bring on more diverse talent into their organizations. In a former life, I was a developer. I started off as a coder for 10 years in the investment banking technology space, first at Lehman Brothers and then Credit Suisse. And then I spent 5 years as a CTO and co-founder of a fintech called Neighbor, which is a multi-award-winning fintech company focused on the salary-deducted lending space. That was an organization that raised over £200 million, lent over £170 million to UK-based employees. And the thing that I was proudest about that organization was that we lent over 50 million to UK-based police officers. So I've been involved in all sorts of areas, from being a developer to being a co-founder and CTO, and now to being a serial entrepreneur and a VC at Untappd Capital, where we invest in underrepresented entrepreneurs. So that's a very quick introduction to me. Normally I do that as a 15-minute talk, so sorry if I've skipped any gaps there. Back over to you, Mike.
That's all right, Ez. And that segues on to my next point. If you do have any questions based on what we spoke about so far, and as we do talk, please do use the ask a question. That's where I'll get most of the questions. I know sometimes people like to use the chat. I'll try as much as possible to see what's going on in the chat, but if you do ask a question using ask a question, that feature, then that will be a lot easier for me to, curate and identify and hopefully answer your questions. Cool. All right, let's get cracking. So let's talk about, so I'm going to talk about the term BAME, and that's been in the news for a while. I do a lot of workshops around the subject of BAME with organizations, and it's recently received some criticism in the papers, but I want to give a nuanced question on this. So I wonder if you can explain a balanced approach on the term BAME, what its purpose is, why it was relevant and why it can be relevant today, but also some of the issues that people have discovered with BAME. So for those who don't know, BAME is an acronym for Black and Ethnic Minority. And so I'm going to pass it over to Ez now to explain the nuances around the term BAME.
BAME. So BAME, interestingly, we used the term BAME initially when we were starting Code Untappd, but to give a quick intro to what BAME is and why it came about. So BAME stands for Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic. And in essence, it's a catch-all term for non-white, right? That's fundamentally what it is. And that is really why it came about, right? Which is everyone recognizes that there are challenges faced by people from the non-white minority in this country. And you're starting to see the conversations building around how do we support these groups. But the issue then comes to, well, which group do we support? Which group do we talk about? Do we talk about Black African English or mixed race African English? Or what about mixed Indian, Chinese? What about Pakistani? What about Iranian? What about Caribbean English? You know, there's so many different demographics that fits into that non-white British that it became a lot easier to have one term that kind of covered the whole range of people. And that term became the word BAME, or the acronym BAME. And initially, it was, you know, there was a lot of controversy around it before because there's always been a debate around, you know, how the different groups within that space, how they're treated, the experiences they have. And we'll come on to that in a moment and why that's quite an issue. But it did have a benefit to begin with, because what it started to say was that there is a challenge that this group of people face, right? And that was really the core starting point, was to recognize that particular issue. And it's allowed us to start to talk about things like, you know, the racial pay gaps that you see, right? It's allowed us to talk about the differences and the challenges we see from educational attainment, from venture capital allocation, all sorts of different ways of referring to that. But it has a big problem, right? Which is that different groups within that demographic, because it is so broad, whilst all suffering from prejudice, have very different lived experiences. And that's not to say that, you know, experiencing racism as someone of Pakistani background is worse or better than experiencing racism as someone of an African background. But your lived experience and the support networks that you have may well be dramatically different, right? And the perceptions and what we know within that BAME space is that there is a hierarchy of demographics as well, right? And I'm not going to go too much into that because that may well be too controversial a topic. But all you have to do is look at mixed race relationships from different backgrounds, and then you start to see where those different challenges start to come in. There'll be certain mixed race relationships that will be acceptable within a certain demographic, others that won't be, right? Because there will be hierarchies as a pecking order, whether informal or formal. Now, if we look at it from a pure business perspective, one of the most visible challenges for me within this space was there was a great report that was recently done around the top 100 BAME businesses in the UK and their contributions to the UK economy. And this was 100 BAME, public BAME organizations that are generating real revenue, real value, and all led by leaders of a minority ethnic background. And that number was about $75 billion worth of contribution to the UK economy, which is a fantastic number. And that's brilliant to see that report. And it was good because it talked about the value these organizations bring. But there was another aspect to it, and they broke down the ethnicities of every business leader in that top 100. And there's another number in that top 100, and that's 1. And that 1 is how many black business leaders there were in that top 100, right? Immediately, what you're starting to see is there are stark disparities within that BAME group. People who have very different lived experiences and very different outcomes. What is very interesting about the black entrepreneur demographic is that they actually create more businesses than almost any other demographic in that space. And that's a fact, that we have the numbers to show that. But going from creating to being successful, there seems to be a very big difference in experience. And these are some of the challenges we start to see. That's what Impact X is all about trying to solve. And this becomes a very real problem if we continue to group these numbers together, because what you're not seeing are the subtleties in how these groups are being treated. And what starts to happen is, well, you know, we've solved our BAME quota because I've got an Indian man who's joined the team. But we know for a fact that of the groups, Indians tend to be overrepresented within that underrepresented space. So how have you solved the problem for BAME as a group overall? You haven't, right? So this is part of that challenge, and that's why I think one of the good things that came out of that recent Race Commission report was to drop the term BAME. There was a lot that was wrong with that report, which I don't think we're going to have time to go into today. And I do genuinely believe that report was a lost opportunity. But I'm glad to see that the term BAME is going to start to fall away from some perspectives. But I know, Michael, you've got some views on the term BAME and how it's actually, there are some benefits to still using it. So I'll pass back over to you now, and love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, actually, there's a lot that you've said in there that, to be honest with you, pretty much aligns with what I feel like with the term. I think it always comes down to approach and intention, and we're going to touch on some of these topics as we talk about, you know, how to recruit and retain. But I feel like, you know, part of the work that I do is trying to show organizations intent is important. And if you're trying to really make a change in a space, you have to really break down more in a modular level what it is you're going for. So don't use the fact that we have this umbrella term as a catch-all to say job done, because that's not helping the situation here. So a lot of the reasons why people are against that term, I actually understand. I think my nuanced approach to it is more of the case. There are probably instances where it could be used or utilized, but it depends on your intention and what you're really trying to do here. So that's my piece on that. And I know you've got an analogy really, because you talk about this, or we spoke about last week, to describe, you know, some of these issues. Why should companies care? Why should people on the call care about these issues? And you sum it up quite nicely in an analogy, and I'm hoping that you can, you know, eloquently explain that to the people on the call.
So I like to talk about the race, right? And I think this is the analogy you're focused on. And you know, life is a race; it's a competition, and we often talk about equality of opportunity, and that then gets confused with equality of outcome. And most of us aren't focused on the equality of outcome. What we're focused on is leveling the playing field so that everyone has the same opportunity to participate. Because to win, it requires skill, it requires effort, it requires natural talent, and it requires a huge amount of luck, right? So everyone can have the same opportunity but have different outcomes when you factor in just those things. And then we can talk about, okay, but there's disparities in the level of coaching, training, support that takes place. Absolutely, we know that. And that's another problem to solve. But there's this myth that we all have equality of opportunity in the first place, right? And you see it a lot. We all go to school in the UK. We're all given the same opportunity for education. We all have the chance to go to university. We all have the chance to join whatever firm, company, and progress through our careers. Ultimately, everyone in the UK has the potential to become prime minister. It's a democracy, right? Okay, so job done. There's no need to worry or consider or discuss this. The reason why I talk about the race is there's a challenge with that. And I like the race analogy because everyone has to get to the starting line to participate in a race. When we look at race day, we've got some people who get driven up to start the race in their parents' Mercedes, right? Nice, warm, comfortable. They've got all the right training gear, ready to go, fresh, really ready to give everything they've got to participate. We get some not quite so lucky, but you know, they live around the corner. They can walk up to race day and they're ready to go. Maybe not quite as warm, but you know, they've got a good fair shake at it, right? And then you have this other group that don't live around the corner. They live a few miles away. And they've had to run just to start the race. Not only have they had to run to start the race, they've had to do it barefoot. So they've had to overcome a significant amount of adversity just to get to the start line, right? What that means is before you even run the race, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're broken, you've got injuries already. And now you've got to compete against all of these people who've been bussed to the line in their parents' car, right? But you've all got the same opportunity to run the race. But what you have is vastly different outcomes based upon the amount of pure energy that people have to actually put into it, right? Now, this is a real problem because, yes, some of those individuals who have had to run 20 miles will be supremely talented, supremely capable, and will still win. And then what happens is we hold a light to those people and we go, look, they did it. Why can't the rest of you? Well, because not everyone has that level of talent. And they shouldn't need to, because there's this whole demographic over here who didn't require that level of talent to succeed, because they were able to put all their energy into the race. Now, if we could take that group of people and give them that same amount of opportunity to give their everything to that race, think what the outcomes would be for everybody. It'd be beneficial. And when people struggle with this analogy, I like to go, well, think about the Olympic team, right? Why is this a problem? If our British Olympic team were told, you're not going to live in the Olympic Village, you're going to live 20 miles away, and you're going to have to run barefoot to start the 100 meters, it would be outrage, right? Outrage. The Sun, the Daily Mail, the Express, everyone would be talking about how the odds are stacked up against our British athletes and how they're not able to participate and can't possibly give their all, and how can we use that as a benchmark for our athletes. And that's what we see every day.
Wow.
Think about that.
Thanks for breaking that down. And I hope those on the call have a good understanding now about the situation, but also understand why you should care as an organization, as individuals, and how beneficial, you know, resolving this problem and helping out when it comes to, you know, helping people, underrepresented groups of people get into the same opportunities, because it actually just equal a better society and a better company, to be honest, as well. And we're going to talk about some of those things now in recruitment. So this topic, or this talk, should I say, is about how to recruit and retain talent. And I think we're going to focus now on the recruitment aspect of it. And I think, you know, as CTOs or people with a techie background, I think the use of technology is a good place to start here. So, you know, with the use of technology, how can people leverage that to help when it comes to recruitment?
That's a really good question. And by the way, we're seeing the questions appearing in the chat. Some great questions there. I'm sure we'll get through to them at some point. How can you better leverage technology with recruitment? I think this is part of the problem, is that recruitment is inherently a people activity. Right? You can't completely remove people from the equation. At some point, someone has to meet that person, whether it's through video, whether it's face-to-face, and make a decision, right? Based off of whatever variables you have. And you can never fully remove that. You can do blind CVs, you can do all sorts of things. I think embracing some of the technology changes, such as interviewing remotely, allowing people to submit videos, is a fantastic thing. I think it allows more people to participate in those interviews without having to jump through some of the more societal hurdles that they need to get through. But ultimately, the key thing for me from an organization is to start utilizing the systems around you to track the data of your process. Identify where your own biases are. What are the gatekeepers? What are the hurdles? Who are the gatekeepers? And what's that funnel looking like for you? As technologists, we're all technologists on this chat, right? And I was a coder for 10 years. If we have a problem, the first thing we do is we start to look at the actual logs. We look at the output. We look at the analytics that we've created around the problem. We put a profiler on it, and we start looking at how is this, what's actually happening under the hood before we try and solve the problem. But it's interesting how rarely we do this when it comes to recruitment, because it's HR's problem, right? Or it's my recruitment agency's problem. They don't have a good enough pipeline. But very few companies can actually turn around and say, well, this is what my pipeline looks like. I have X number of people in it. They've come from this kind of background. I see this many technologists from Russell Group universities, this many from a state education background. And, it's difficult to do these things. But I can tell you as a VC, our investment process is very similar to a recruitment pipeline, right? And I have a process built into ImpactX whereby we can take intake forms through our website. That's all processed into our system, and I can track exactly the demographics of who is applying for funding from us, what their company is, what the background of the founders are. And then I have dashboards which show me what that looks like. And I built that by myself in JavaScript, AppScript, using just Google tooling, right? So everyone has the capability to solve this particular problem. That doesn't solve your recruitment issue, but at least it gives you visibility. And I think that's the most important thing, right? Using the technology and the tools we have and the capabilities that we have as technologists to gain actual visibility on your pipeline problem, identify it. Then you can take that information and start working with your recruiters and saying, why are you only sending me X people from this kind of background? Okay, is it an issue that you do have people from this background, but they can't even get to the office to meet me? Well, then let's do a video chat with them. Everyone's working remotely anyway, right? Why not? So there are solutions around, blind CV platforms. There are platforms that will help track journeys through. There are video interview platforms. There are all sorts. The technology solutions are out there, but it really comes down to having the will to solve that problem and having the desire to actually take ownership of it. You can't outsource this to your HR department. You can't outsource this to your recruiter. You have to take ownership of this problem yourselves.
Yeah, that's 100% correct, and some really great points there. Just to add my 2 cents, I would say, obviously, with the use of technology, I like to focus on statistics in this aspect. So when a lot of companies, ask questions about their early careers pipeline, for example, and say they're really struggling to hire talent, one thing I always ask them is, where are you getting that talent? And then when they start to look at things like Russell groups, or they start to pinpoint things, my next question is, what's the statistics of people of color in those Russell groups? And then when we break that down using, we can use simple Excel data science techniques to identify where are the people that are going to university from a certain background going to, you realize it's not as many in those Russell groups. So, first of all, my question is, let's use technology, or let's use statistics in focusing on the intention of looking for people. We really need to start focusing on leveraging technology in order to do that. So, whether it's looking at, where those people, who you're looking for are located, how can we leverage that, and how are we tracking that, as Ez was saying earlier. And I think you also touched on the fact that it's a us problem, or it's a me problem. It shouldn't be down to HR, and that's very important. And I think what's also equally important for people who are struggling with this as well is to work, with people that have been in this space as well. So I wonder if you can just talk about, how you collaborate, or you're building,
Mm.
your organization, or one of the many things you are doing to help in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and some great points, Chris. Thank you. I haven't seen that platform, but we'll certainly take a look at it. Is that Instant? Yeah, instant.com, I think it would be. That sounds really interesting. So, Code Untappd, fundamentally, what do we do? So we work there are some fantastic social enterprise organizations out there that are helping to train and develop great diverse technology talents. And our thing is about, well, how do we get them in front of the organizations that need it? And I have an incredible network of tier one CIOs, CTOs, organizations. I'm an advisor to the board for the UK IT Leaders Network, which is about 3,000 CIOs across the country, or CIOs, CTOs, etc. And I mentor any number of businesses. And being an investor, is not that difficult for me to get in front of some of these organizations. So one of the great things about what we can do with Code Untappd, and it's all about opening the door and pulling people through, if you see what I mean, is actually we started by running innovation labs, workshops, where we would do them in partnership with these businesses. We'd get real asks, real challenges from them. And then we would hold innovation labs days or hackathon days, that type of thing, whereby we would get a cohort of 30 to 50, I think was the maximum we've had, of people from diverse backgrounds in front of these organizations, trying to solve real problems for them, and giving their people the chance to not just see them get their ideas, but also to see them at work, see them solve real problems, work alongside them, get some real face time for these individuals. And I think that's part of one of the key things. I often get asked by organizations, well, we want to hire more diverse people, but how do we do that? And for me, it's about getting in front of these communities and actually speaking with them. It's great if you do a little bit of mentoring, et cetera, but you don't really get to see people in day-to-day action. And one of the biggest challenges you hear, and it was quite a thing for a while, everyone wanted to run a hackathon. But then people realize, I don't have the time, may not have the brand power to bring people in, my team don't have the capacity to run one. And ultimately, it just falls by the wayside. And our Innovation Labs days almost acted as almost like a recruitment center day type thing. We'd be able to bring people together with an organization. You'd get to see them. You'd get to see them in action. And that was fantastic. But it doesn't really scale across organizations. There's only so many of these that you can do. So what we've been very focused on at the moment at Code Untappd, and we're still in the process of rolling this out, is building out a platform where we can actually aggregate all of these great diverse technologists in one place. We can integrate them with our online learning platform. We can run coding assessments. We can give them online training. But then ultimately, we can give the hiring managers from these organizations a clear line of sight and view on a qualified group of individuals who are from diverse backgrounds, who have technical skills. Not only do they have the skills, you can see what the skills are, you can see where their learning pathways are, what they've been focused on. So it's all about getting that exposure, getting that understanding, and seeing what people are doing. So that's one of the ways that we're very much involved in the space of Code Untappd.
Cool. Thank you for explaining that. And I'm going to try and succinctly summarize what we've talked about so far when it comes to recruitment. So for those who are listening that just want, 3 ways that you can, significantly increase your recruitment drive when it comes to finding people from a diverse background, from a BAME background for the purposes of this conversation, is first of all, making it intent when you are advertising. So whenever you do have your job profile, your job description, whatever you do have that you're advertising on, make it clear that is something that you're looking for. As technologists, we should leverage technology. So make sure we're using the right data science tools to identify people that we're looking for our organization. And finally, just to collaborate with organizations who are actually doing this, who are actually frontline and looking into this as their career and their profession. So if you don't have the capacity to do it, try and collaborate with people that are looking to do this. So that's a few ways that you can help with recruitment. I'm now going to shift the conversation more into retainment, unless you wanted to add something as when it came to recruitment.
So someone's asked a really interesting question about, is it a pipeline problem, a supply issue based on ethnicity? And, trying to get data on this is part of the problem, right? It's very, very difficult to get this level of information. And this is why we have to ask these questions, right? And this is part of the challenge. But what I find really interesting is, so there was a report I hired which showed that something like 17% of UK tech workers are of Asian background, 3% are Black, 2% are Hispanic, 6% are mixed multiple, right? 65% is white. Now, on the face of it, that seems actually pretty good, right? Those are pretty in line with the national statistics on diversity. 14% of the population is non-white in the UK, which is quite surprising when you look at what you read in the newspapers. You'd think it'd be very different to that. But in essence, there's just over a 1 in 10 chance of you meeting a non-white person if you're in England. But actually, here's the thing. If you leave a city centre like London, that 1 in 10 drops dramatically to more like maybe 2 or 3 in 100, right? That's the difference. So when I see these statistics and you say, okay, we're in line with the national average, I'm like, yeah, but where are you based, right? And you hear, well, I'm based in London. Okay, so what's the percentage breakdown in London for diversity? And actually, when you realize that, you have boroughs that are 45-55% ethnic minority, right? And across London, it is around 45%. That changes things quite dramatically. You then have to, again, start asking the question, well, what's going on with your recruitment pipeline, right? So there is a challenge there. And the biggest challenge for me is, one, getting the data. We see any number of reports around this problem, but actually what we rarely see is the underlying data that says, I would love to see, Andy, in response to your question, how many people from different ethnicities are starting STEM subjects of XYZ at college, at university, then go on to do a technology or STEM focused job. And at what stage, what level do they reach, and do they leave the organization? If we could see that funnel and have that level of data, this conversation would be so much more meaningful than it is, right? And that's what so many of our organizations that we work with are focused on, whether it's 10 by 10, whether it's Extend VC, whether it's ImpactX, whether it's Ada Ventures. So many companies are trying to get hold of or generate this level of information. And we just don't have enough of it at the moment. So, Andy, I apologize, it doesn't fully answer your question, but I think it starts to show some of the challenges we have with getting those answers. Sorry, Mike, I completely skipped past your original question. So if you could just repeat it for me, that'd be brilliant.
No, I was just saying, as we move on to the retainment piece, is there anything you wanted to add when it came to recruitment? So you kind of answered it through Andy anyway, so that's all good. I'm now going to segue into retainment now, and again, talk about maybe, again, technology. How can we use technology to help companies retain, talent from, people that have ethnic minority backgrounds?
So I think, that's a really difficult question to answer. And I don't think technology is the answer to everything. I think we are technologists who are solving a human problem, right? And there's only so far technology will go to solving the problem for us, right? We have to recognize that there are inherent challenges that we have to overcome. And I know you want to speak a little bit about our personal journeys at some point as well, and the challenges we've seen and faced with that. So I think, to try to answer that question directly, it's similar to my original answer around the pipeline, but it's a slightly different focus now, and it comes to a question that was asked earlier on in the chat by John, I think it was. Do you think people from minority groups are overlooked when going for roles or promotion because of their ethnicity? Right? And the answer is I can't answer that question because, again, I lack the hard facts. But what I can say is that percentage of that I gave earlier around national statistics versus technology within the team changes dramatically as you go up the stack, right? And I think there was only one black CEO of a FTSE 100 company. One, I think that was. And we saw in my earlier talk around BAME contributions and BAME businesses, there was only one black CEO in that list, right? So those are just two very clear data points. There is something that happens within our organizations from all of these people coming into them to then what happens at the top. What blocks them? And I struggle to believe that it's a lack of talent. Right? I really genuinely do, because I see fantastically talented people every day, right? And let's be honest, we just have to look at our governments to see that it doesn't take talent to become a fantastically successful individual, provided you have the right connections, the right background, and are willing to bluff your way through things, right? So I won't name names, but I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about. I don't want to get Andy into trouble, right? So there's a gap, there is a problem as we start to see that promotional process, right? Is it a support network issue? Is it just because we're not hitting the milestones that we should be hitting? Is it unconscious biases that's causing the problems? Is it conscious biases that are causing the problems? Is it my tone of voice that turns you off as I'm trying to progress? What is it? We see it over and over and over and over and over again. So again, I think if we're going to focus on the technology solution, it comes down to tracking the data. Who has applied for roles and what backgrounds have they come from? Are we seeing the same number of people applying from different backgrounds? And if not, why not? If we are, what happens at the next level? Are we seeing people progressing? If not, why not? And if we are, where? And there will be differences. You'll find there'll be bottlenecks in your organization. Is it the same managers in your organization who are putting brakes on that progress? And the data will start to reveal that information, but you have to collect it. But again, this is stuff that you have to work very, very closely with your HR teams to do. I guarantee you your HR group is understaffed, under-supported, and underappreciated. And I guarantee you they do not have the technical skills to do what we're talking about here. So if you're serious about solving this problem, that's really where you need to invest your technology time and effort into supporting your HR team and being able to understand what is happening within your own organizations. We put incredible amounts of money and time into understanding our customer. How about we understand our employees as well?
Yeah, and that's so greatly put. And part of the reason why I always like to talk about technology, not just because we're all technologists on the call, just because it's something that can easily be identified and leveraged. Ultimately, we can't escape the people factor, as we've already explained as well. So no matter how much we utilize technology, it's people behind technology is always what I tell people. So it's definitely an important factor. You also touched on leadership, and actually specifically the path to leadership, because when we are talking about retainment, and you also touched on personal journeys. So for me, in my previous employment, I was a BAME co-chair of a fairly large organization, and 9 times out of 10 when I was dealing with people who were leaving organizations were really because of opportunity and lack of promotional opportunities. And so for me, one way I always tell companies or ask companies when it comes to retainment is, what are your paths for leadership, specifically for BAME people? And sometimes they give a generic answer to say we have, one purpose or one size fits all situation here, but if you're looking to retain specifically a group of people, and then talking about, again, it's that umbrella thing where you're just saying, well, we've got it for everyone, it's fine, but if you're trying to tackle a specific problem, you have to be specific on the solution as well. And so for me personally, one of the key things of retainment has always been path to leadership, and how effective that that strategy is in your organization. And I wonder if you can also touch on your own personal experience in this space, and whether you agree or maybe you have a nuanced or different point of this. So I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and I imagine CTO Craft, fantastic group. So we've got 77 people listening to this chat, and I bet you we've got people nodding along, and we've got others who are like, I'm not so sure about this, and I get it. All right. It's uncomfortable the minute we start talking about, separate pathways and separate processes for people from different backgrounds and the rest of it. And should we have that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It becomes really uncomfortable. And then you start to hear the phrase, and it's been used in the chat, but for the right context. Well, I'm colorblind. I only promote based off talent, right? That's all I do. I don't see color. I promote purely based on the talent of the individual and their attainment. But if you are truly colorblind, what you've now ignored are all the problems that sit behind that person of color, right? All the reasons why maybe they don't voice up their opinion when they should, right? Because in the past, they've been told, well, you're too loud, right? You're too aggressive, okay? And I've been, as a VC, I've been on panels for accelerators and incubators for pitch competitions where I've had founders pitch their ideas. One's been told behind the scenes, we've had a conversation, and the conversation's come out. This founder was incredible, really confident, really knew stuff, really, really pushed the idea forward. Another founder's been told, well, not been told, but the conversation was, this founder's really cocky, arrogant, was quite aggressive with the pitch, didn't really like what I was hearing. Very similar product, very similar concept, very similar traction. The only difference is color, right? And tone of voice and the way they spoke. And these are very real problems. So irrespective of whether you are colorblind, there are things and activities happening. As I said, has that individual had to run 20 miles barefoot just to get to the start line of that race? Doesn't matter if you're colorblind as they're running. What happened to get them there? And are you getting the full benefit of those individuals? So all of these things are really important when you factor in how are people treated during their journey, right? So there must be things that are looked at differently when we factor this in, right? Now, from my own personal journey, it's an interesting one, because maybe I am one of those lucky ones who has been supremely lucky, irrespective of starting on the back foot. And let's be clear, I did start on the back foot. My parents, from a mixed family. My mother was Nigerian, my dad was white English. They met in Nigeria. They were both qualified teachers. They moved over to the UK. My mum had to retrain because the government did not recognise her training qualifications. She spent a number of years retraining as a teacher, and worked as a cleaner for a number of years. So my mum worked as a cleaner. I ended up going to a state school where the 5 A to C pass rate was 14%. Right? You're more likely to fail than to pass in my school, just statistically, irrespective of the colour. Right? So I didn't have a good learning habit. I failed my A-levels, had to resit, had to talk my way back into them. It builds a level of resilience, which has been important in my skill set and my capability. But why have I needed to build that level of resilience, right? Think about all the time and energy I've had to put into building resilience that I could have been putting into succeeding, right? I then, it's amazing, because when I applied to do, I was at the University of Kent and I was applying for internships. I applied to IBM, I applied to Microsoft, I applied to Sun Microsystems, and I applied to Core Design, video games company. I didn't get any one of them because of my previous track record, having to resit my A-levels and the rest of it. Amazingly now, with Untappd, I'm a venture partner for Microsoft, right? I often have conversations with these companies about how better to attract diverse technology talent. Who would have predicted at school that I would have ended up building a company that would raise over £200 million? That I'd be part of a venture capital fund investing 100 million in diverse entrepreneurs. So all of these things, who could have spotted that? Who could have seen it? And as I worked my way up the ladder, I started to see those glass ceilings in technology in particular. Things start to slow down, right? Oh, this other group, they need to be promoted. This other person, they need to be promoted. And I just started to feel very much that the ladder here is too long. And it wasn't so much that I was saying, oh, I can feel a concrete glass ceiling, but the ladder seemed incredibly long and it didn't seem to be shortening at all. So that was when I made the decision that I wanted to be a founder. So I wanted to have more control over my own destiny rather than leaving it to this group of other people to promote me. I wanted to go out and get my own promotion. So that's when I co-founded Neighbor. And through that activity, the irony of all of this is amazing. You know, I wasn't given the opportunity to be an entrepreneur within Credit Suisse. As soon as I left Credit Suisse and co-founded Neighbor, I was invited to their entrepreneurs event, right? Which was incredible. So I'm now at this Credit Suisse entrepreneurs event when I've had to leave the company to do it, right? And it's this kind of thing we see quite often. And I do get asked the question, what can we do as an organization to better support people breaking through those glass ceilings? And I'm often torn between, well, can you as an organization do that? And would it be better for those individuals to just leave your company and go and do their own thing and be the masters of their own destiny? It's a tough question. So my journey's been interesting and it's taken me through all sorts. I know we'll touch on mentorship, but a key thing for me has been the advice and guidance and support of people around me to give me that advice, because I spent 10 years in investment banking. I'm now in venture capital. My parents were teachers. I don't have anyone in my childhood network who knew anything about the spaces that I now work in. I didn't have that rich uncle to support me or guide me, right? So the only support I've had in navigating my pathway are through my peers and those who have mentored and advised me. So that's why it's so important to not just be colorblind, right? But to be aware of the backgrounds and the things that have impacted those people as they're progressing through your organization. Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question. So I hope it's been useful.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's definitely important to identify, journeys, because not everyone's journey is the same. We've already touched on statistics when it comes to, BAME people in the workplace, and even in particular Black people in the workplace, where, the stats on that's even low when it comes to, progression and things like that. Obviously, you've touched on how, fortunately, despite those adversities, you were able to make it out and you were able to, become an entrepreneur and have, the success that you do have. But for those people who maybe don't have that ability, that are currently in organizations now, and you already touched on mentorship, how can the use of mentorship be used when it comes to retaining BAME talent?
So I think I would love to see every decision maker in a bank or in any company mentor individuals from a diverse background. When I say a diverse background, I mean a background different to theirs, right? Different socioeconomic background, different racial background, different gender, ideally, right? To be able to both give them exposure to a different way of thinking and a different way of doing things, but it's almost like co-mentorship, right? You hear about reverse mentorship schemes where not only is the individual being mentored, but the mentor is being mentored by the mentee, right? And I'd love to see more of this, because I think that exposure to culture is absolutely critical to understanding it, You can never, if you're a white man, you can never experience being a black man. You can't, right? As a black man, I can never experience being a white woman. It's not possible, right? But I can empathize with a situation. I can learn about it. I can start to see the challenges. I can never experience them, but I can see them, right? And for once you start to have those, your eyes start to open, you start to recognize the challenges, and you start to have to advise and guide others, you start to see them in the other people that are coming through towards you, right? You start to learn, what question should I really be asking this person, right? And is it more about their attitude and aptitude as opposed to their network and skills that they have already, right? What am I really looking for? Because I've seen some incredible growth over here. So can I replicate that? Or is it actually here, but I'm just not seeing it because I'm colorblind, right? So those are some of the things I'd love to see happen more. That mentorship, that advisory, that's so important, right? It's so important. And it's not just about having a coffee with someone once in a while, right? It's not. It's about really giving them an understanding of what is different, what is needed, what you're looking for, where their challenges are, helping them level themselves up, right? But also leveling yourself up from that perspective and maybe removing some of the barriers that you've unfairly put in place. Why do you need Russell Group University students? Right? Some of the worst colleagues I've ever worked with have been PhDs, right? Those qualifications are cool, they're great, they mean X, Y, Z, that's brilliant, but do you actually need it for the role that you're trying to fulfill? What is it you're really looking for in your people? Are you looking for skills? Yeah, of course you are. Are you looking for qualifications? Yeah, great. I think mainly I'm looking for people with the right attitude and aptitude to get the job done. That's what I'm looking for usually, right? And it's funny, we hire for skills, but we fire for attitude almost every time, right? So I would just love to see more of that emphasis from a mentoring perspective.
Yeah, and you touched on something that actually took me back to something that happened when I worked with a previous organization when it came to mentoring. So one of the success stories of when you do mentoring and implement a program is you do get a chance to embrace cultures of, cultures that you haven't been accustomed to or weren't aware of. So for example, now it's Ramadan, for example, and in my previous organization where I set up a mentoring program, those two mentee and mentors I'm thinking in particular, they struck it off so well that, this person's now started to even participate and just support. Now they understand with Ramadan, it means that people that celebrate it or are in Ramadan are adjusting their hours. So it might not mean they can work at a certain point in the day. They don't eat at a certain point of the day too. So there's certain meetings that have to be adjusted or have to work because we're working in this flexible time now. Those people are now working more collaboratively using technology as a way to, work together. And that example of embracing different people's cultures and understanding really does make a difference when it comes to retainment as well. So that's another thing I really wanted to highlight. We're nearing time. So what I'd like to do is basically give you a few pointers when it comes to retainment, give as the last word, in general of everything we've spoken about, maybe one key takeaway that he has for people on this call, and then if we have time, I'll try and answer some questions if we've got some. So when it comes to retainment, I would say what we've discussed is paths to leadership is very important. The aspect of mentoring is definitely important as well. We've always highlighted technology as a good conversation starter. That's also equally important. So what does your workday system say when it comes to, pay gap, for example, or, when it comes to feedback, how are you using feedback correctly? Are you strategically asking the right questions? What's your intent behind the survey? So that level of intentment is important. Embracing culture, we've already touched on. And again, just collaborating with people or organizations that are in this space that can really elevate retainment in your organization. So I'm going to pass it over to Ez now to just basically summarize really anything he just wants to highlight for people on the call.
It's such a difficult thing. How do I summarize all of this? I think the race is my number one piece, right? Recognize that you are seeing different outcomes because people turn up to race day with different levels of energy, right? And if we want the best outcomes for our business, it's about making sure that everyone is starting on a level playing field, right? And it's about giving them all the right level of opportunity and understanding why some of those differences happen. And I know some people will sit there and go, but I haven't got time to do this, blah, 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 blah. But you want the best outcome for your company, don't you? So why would you restrict your options when you can widen them, right? That's really what it comes down to for me. Understand the background, understand the value that different people bring, and understand what they can bring if they're able to bring all of their energy to the day. And recognize that you have a very diverse workforce and that those changes, those differences bring value, not conflict. Okay? Cool. That's it for me.
Thank you for sharing that. As we had a couple questions from the Ask a Question. This may have been answered as we were talking, but one question came in from John. Do you think people from minority groups are overlooked when going for roles because of their ethnicity?
We spoke about that.
Okay, and I really like the products that hide details that could lead to discrimination, but how do we ensure that those minorities are being crowded out due to sheer numbers, increase their chances to get a foot in? Actively make sure groups are being interviewed, etc. Would be really interested to know the panel's view. So, Ez?
So that was an interesting question. So I really like the products hide details that can lead to discrimination. So we're talking about blind CVs and the rest of it, right? Mm-hmm. But how do we ensure those minorities who are being crowded out with sheer numbers increase their chance to get a foot in? Actively make sure that certain groups have to be interviewed, etc., etc. So this is an interesting question, right? And it comes down to the question of, really, do we impose some form of quota system, right? Really is what we're talking about there. Now, it's such a difficult one to answer, but it is interesting. A great example of this was in the US when they talked about female representation on boards of NASDAQ, of NASDAQ companies and the rest of it. S&P 500. And the key thing was there aren't enough female executives. There's just not enough of them, and we don't have them. They're not around. We can't find them. They introduced a rule, which was you have to have one. Very simple, pretty black and white. You have to have one. And all of a sudden, all of these female execs came out of the woodwork. They found them everywhere, right? We saw the same thing with creativity and production. You know, you look at Broadway, you look at theatre. There's a lack of diverse stars, right? There just is. Then Hamilton came along, and Hamilton needed to go global, and all of a sudden we found all these incredible black actors, artists, singers, performers that apparently weren't anywhere to be seen, but now that they had an opportunity, they could be. So I think it's all about really, I'm not saying you have to put in place quotas around recruitment, but put quotas around the funnel, right? Understand where your funnel is and start to reward those recruiters who are bringing in the right amount of talent into your funnel, and stop working the ones who aren't, right? Say, look, this is what we want to see. Then track the information and make sure you hire the best people. And hopefully there'll be a decent balance at the end. But I would really start there, right? At least let's start focusing on where is our pipeline coming from, right? Solve that problem.
That is a good point, and that's exactly what I would have said too. So having a focus of where the pipeline's coming from. If you're working with external partners, what are the kind of like pipelines that exist in their organization, and then work from there. Be strategic. You don't want to put quotas, but collaborate with people that are in this space. So I'm going to put contact details of myself and Ez in the chat. Should you want to ask us any more questions after this, or just want to connect with us on our socials and whatnot, we'll be more than happy to answer questions that we haven't been able to answer in the chat or whatnot. I just want to say thank you, Ez, for taking the time, and thank you to those on the call who had take the time to have a conversation. This will be recorded, so people still have the opportunity to watch this again. But until then, until the next CTO Craft, I want to say thank you, Ez. Any last words before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for listening to me. And I know some of what we say might be contentious. It's just think about it. That's all I want to say.
Cool. All right, that's it from us. Take care and see you soon. Peace out.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.